Genesis chapter 10. The second kingdom would have been Egypt under Pharaoh. We read about that in the book of Exodus. Those two kings are fallen. The third, the kingdom of Assyria under Sennacherib, that kingdom is fallen. The fourth kingdom would have been the Medo or Persian Empire under Cyrus the king. That kingdom's fallen. The fifth would have been the kingdom of Greece under Alexander the Great, although his name's not recorded in the Bible. The kingdom is certainly identified in the book of Daniel. The sixth king would have been the kingdom of Rome, which was in power at the time John wrote, under the Caesars. And the Emperor Domitian was the Caesar on the throne at Rome. There's going to be another king showing up after that, verse 10. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space, it says there. Let me moving along here. Verse 11 again says, And the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seventh, and goeth into perdition. Now the list of the preceding kings, if you include Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, which we read about in the book of Daniel, then that would have been 6 kings before the Caesars of Rome. The Caesar would have been number 7 on that list. But if you eliminate Babylon as really being in essence the same kingdom as the original Babylon under Nimrod, both of those, in essence, the same kingdom, the same world unifying attempt, then, I'm looking here to, if you counted them separately, that would make 7 kings, if you include the Roman Empire. And the Antichrist would be number 8, who is of the 7. Now, if you don't count Babylon twice, and you only count the first one on the list, then the 7th king and the 8th king, which just says the 8th is of the 7, the 7th king and the 8th king may, in fact, be one and the same person. First, he appears as the man of sin, the Antichrist. Everyone is fooled and deceived into thinking that he is the Savior of the world. And they worship him, they line up to take his mark, and he ordains a covenant with Israel to rebuild their temple and establish their place once again in Israel permanently. And then halfway through that tribulation, he turns on the Jew. He shows forth his true colors as Satan in human form, and Judas coming up once again out of the bottomless pit, inhabiting that body of that man. And now he is identified as the man of the son of perdition. Maybe 2 identities wrapped up in one person. That's conjecture, but it's a possibility. Now, let's move on to verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. It doesn't say that they are kings, but they certainly receive power as kings. These 10 horns represent 10 kings, which are identical to the 10 kings found in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 2. And they correspond to 10 toes on the foot or the feet of the image that Daniel saw in his day, in his vision. They also represent the final kingdom on this earth right before Jesus Christ comes back. Now, there are all these one world organizations that everybody's always trying to figure out. These conspiracy buffs are always trying to get at the heart and who's really running the world. Is it the Council on Foreign Relations? Is it this other group, the Trilateral Commission, and their members? Is it the Bilderbergers? Is it the Rothschilds? Is it the Illuminati? And another group called the Club of Rome. That was another group founded in 1968 at a villa in Rome, Italy, hence the name. The Club of Rome, made up of international bankers and industrialists and capitalists and so forth, and they've said that they would decide and they would set out to identify the worst problems in the world and how these problems can be addressed. And of course, you can get on the internet and type it in and bring up all kinds of videos and documents and reports of people who claim that they've gotten, gotten right to the source and they can explain what this is. Well, the Club of Rome issued a report in which they tentatively would divide the entire world into 10 sectors, 10 zones, each one, of course, answerable to a higher, more central authority. And you can conceivably see how 10 people or 10 kings would have authority over each one of those zones, and they're divided according to population and economic output, and they'd all be answerable to one central authority over them. And you can see in theory or in concept how that might fulfill 10 kings to receive power as kings with the beast for 1 hour. Verse 13, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So you can conceive of how there would be a federation of 10 kings or 10 kingdoms, 10 regions of the earth. And of course, they would have to, each country would have to defer its own national sovereignty to a higher authority. And already you're seeing the higher courts in the United States, federal appeals courts, and even some talk among the U.S. Supreme Court justices that perhaps we should not just go by our own Constitution, but maybe we should take into account what other nations say when they have a similar problem, or what other nations have done, what other courts have decided around the world about the same issue in their country, and use international law to help us interpret the decisions we ought to make here. Let's not limit it only to our own Constitution. Let's take into account international courts, international tribunals, and see what their opinion is on the matter. I don't want to know what another court around the world says. And I don't really want to know how our own justices interpret, as much as I want them to just go by what's written in the Constitution. Go by the, it seems to me it would be a much safer approach to just go by the letter of the law, rather than trying to figure out what the spirit of it is, because that's always becomes flexible and bendable, and you can, well, he might have wanted it to mean this, and might have wanted it to mean that. Just go by what it says. That seems to me to always be the safest approach, but it's not the approach used in the world today. Verse 14, however, says, "These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. They that are with him are called and chosen and faithful." As I said, the 10 kings and their kingdoms represent the final government of the world that will be in power when Christ returns. And he won't have any trouble dispensing wrath upon them when he does. Verse 15 says, "And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." You notice that your first water birth, or your first birth, when you became a natural person in the world, was a water birth. And that puts you into this great pool of waters of peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And then you go to the Dodger Stadium, and everybody in the grandstands can do the wave together. They can get up, wave their hands, and watch that whole movement go around. And it looks very similar to a wave of water